Let's now look at the Windows Autopilot process in a little bit more detail. Once you understand the process, you'll then be able to pinpoint which part is causing errors, and then you'll be able to troubleshoot the problems. On screen, you can see a pictorial representation of the Windows Autopilot process. It starts with the purchase of a device, where we then extract the hardware ID, and it reaches the end of the process with the device being set up, configured, and ready for the user to use. The process begins with devices being purchased, and Windows 10 is already installed by the manufacturer. Windows Autopilot will only work with Windows 10 Pro Enterprise or Education version 1703 or later. Your vendor will install all the drivers and optimal settings to make the device perform well. We can remove any bloatware or unnecessary software at a later stage, but we no longer wipe the device and install our own corporate image. There are several approved vendors who participate in the Windows Autopilot program, and these vendors will provide the hardware ID for the devices that they supply. If you buy a device from a non-approved vendor, or you use an existing Windows 10 machine, you can still extract a hardware ID yourself by using PowerShell. The second step in the process is that an administrator needs to pre-configure device profiles and settings on your tenant. You need to upload a list of device hardware IDs to the Windows Autopilot service if this has not already been done by the vendor. You'll then create a deployment profile to manage the initial setup steps, for example, the language for the device. You'll assign the devices to the deployment profiles, and you'll create device configuration policies and device compliance policies and deploy apps to specific groups. After purchase and setup, devices are then delivered to your end users. You can distribute the devices to your end users, or the delivery can be directly from your vendor, since you don't actually need to touch the device. Imagine when a remote employee unboxes their new or replacement device. There's an element of magic when an employee opens a box for the first time and finds an untouched device in pristine condition, which connects to the corporate network and just works. When the end user receives their new device, they'll connect it to the internet. Windows Autopilot is a cloud-based service, and if a device cannot connect to the internet, then the Autopilot deployment will fail. The user needs to provide connection details to the Wi-Fi or local network so that the Windows Autopilot service can validate if the device hardware ID is registered with Autopilot. In the next stage, the end user logs in with their Azure Active Directory credentials. The user will enter their credentials, which are then authenticated. The device will be joined to Azure AD and auto-enrolled into Intune management. Microsoft Intune will then take over and will automatically deploy the management package to the device. The Microsoft Intune stage is the one which delivers pre-configured policies, settings, and apps to the device, and can take some time. This could be just a few minutes or a lengthy amount of time, depending on the complexity of your security settings, device configuration policies, and software that you deploy. You can decide if the device should be made available to the user before all of the settings are in place, or only once the device meets all of the corporate requirements. Once the device successfully reaches end of the process, the device is set up, configured, and ready to use. I've seen this process deploy thousands of devices to users, and it really does revolutionize and modernize how central IT deploys Windows 10 devices. Nowadays, employees can work from the office, be partly remote, or even work from home on a permanent basis. IT departments need to upgrade their capabilities to keep pace with this change in work locations and offer a more agile service so that they can provision devices for those users who are outside the traditional head office environment. For Windows 10 devices, a new deployment feature called Windows Autopilot provides IT with the tools to fulfill this requirement. Windows Autopilot devices are configured straight out of the box. Traditional wipe and load is no longer required, and imaging or manually preparing devices before a user takes them will become obsolete. Today's administrators deploy devices directly to users, and when a new device is switched on by the user, settings and apps are automatically deployed to the device by using the Windows Autopilot service. At the end of the setup process, the device is fully configured, secured, and ready to use. Let's take a mile-high view of the Windows Autopilot process to see the three main stages. First, new devices are purchased from a vendor with Windows 10 already installed, with all the drivers and optimal settings configured. An administrator uses a web portal to pre-configure profiles and settings and assigns the device to a deployment profile. When an end user receives their device, they connect the device to the internet. Their credentials are verified by Azure AD, and their device will be automatically provisioned by Windows Autopilot and Microsoft Intune. Before you can resolve any autopilot issues, you need to identify in which part of the process the problem is occurring. Let's break down the Windows Autopilot process into some logical, technical steps. First, the Windows 10 device will establish an internet connection. Then the deployment profile will be delivered by the cloud-based Windows Autopilot deployment service. The deployment profile will configure the device and manage the out-of-box experience, or OOBE. Users will then enter their Azure AD credentials. Azure AD will verify the credentials and join the device to Azure AD. And then finally, the device will be auto-enrolled into management with Microsoft Intune. Intune will then take over and deliver policies, settings, and ads to the device so that the device meets the corporate requirements. The device will then be fully set up and ready to use by the user.